Good afternoon. My name is Allison Kaplan. I'm Director of Education at the National First Ladies Library located in Canton, Ohio at the National First Ladies Historic Site, where you can see me today. We are currently open to the public. We have a number of really great exhibitions available at the site curated by the National First Ladies Library. One is the first 100 days, which examines the first 100 days of the First Lady's administration with everything from the inauguration, fashion, picking issues to adopt, and some of the first things that the First Lady will host, like Easter. So there are all sorts of amazing objects on view. There's also a small exhibition on Anne Lowe, the African-American fashion designer who designed Jacqueline Kennedy's wedding dress and broke many boundaries herself, as well as an exhibition exploring the the wedding anniversary of the McKinleys. And of course, the site is also home to Ida McKinley's childhood home, which is now fully open to the public with tours led by the National Park Service. So we're super excited about that. I also want to mention before we get started some of our upcoming programs. All of our programs are accessible via Zoom or Eventbrite. You can register on Eventbrite and screen them later on YouTube or screen them live here on Zoom or on Facebook. So however you are watching today, we are happy to have you, and we encourage you to check out some of our other programs, whether this is your first First Ladies program or you are a regular here. If you have a question for our speaker today, if you have comments about the film and what you thought about it, if you liked it, if you didn't like it, what you want to know more about, please leave them in the chat or the Q&A, and as we talk today, we'll get to them. Some other programs I wanted to mention. If you have children, grandchildren, we have some cool programs for kids this summer. We have First Lady kits for kids. So they're hands-on kits that you can order through the National First Ladies Library. They're all inspired by First Ladies in gardening. They come with really cool seeds inspired by the First Ladies. You can see Eleanor, Michelle. This month we're celebrating Lady Bird Johnson. So the box contains seeds, prompts for an activity, some information about that First Lady. It's super fun, and it's a great activity for kids of any age. The other thing I wanted to mention, if you love connecting up with us for our film series, our book club is coming up soon. We are reading the book Eleanor by David McCullough. It is a biography of Eleanor Roosevelt. I think it's the first one-volume biography of Eleanor that has come out in a while. It's super engrossing. Don't be afraid of it as a big, heavy read. It's a perfect beach read if you love political biographies or historic biographies. We are going to be reading that on August 23rd. So if you want to connect with us and discuss the book and discuss Eleanor Roosevelt, who doesn't love to discuss Eleanor, you can take that out from your local library or whatever independent bookstore or book place that you love to go to and read along with us. So August 23rd, we also have a great program called Cooking with the First Ladies. Sarah Morgan joins us every few months to take a deep dive into one particular First Lady, and we cook along as we talk about that First Lady's history. We're going to be taking a look at Jacqueline Kennedy. I'm super excited about this one. There's a number of recipes we're going to be making as we talk about Jackie and her history as a First Lady. But one of my favorites is the cocktail, the Clint, which is like the perfect summer cocktail. So that's July 19th. Our next legacy lecture is August 4th, and we're going to be looking at the history of women in air and space with the International Women's Air and Space Museum located up in Cleveland. And if you love talking about women's documentaries. Our next film next month is RBG. So even if it's one that you've seen and you want to revisit, it is streaming just like this film through Hoopla with our partner Stark Library. If you have an Ohio library card or a Stark Library card, you should be able to access it via Hoopla. And I think what we're going to be doing, I need to confirm it in the next few days or so, is going on a virtual tour of the RBG exhibition up in Cleveland at the Malts Museum of Jewish Heritage. So it should be really fun. I think the exhibition adds a whole new dimension to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and it's a perfect time to revisit her after her passing. So I hope that you will join us for that discussion. We're going to do the tour and then be joined by a docent who will do the Q&A with us. So those are the upcoming programs. And if you've made it through that, I wanted to mention about accessing the film. So if you're out of state and you've registered on Eventbrite, you should have received a link to access it. But again, however you like to access and watch and stream your films, this one is available on a few other outlets. But if you haven't registered yet, you can always reach out to me and we'll make sure that you get a link. But our film today, Underexposed, is available online and also on Hoopla. We don't expect to share a bunch of spoilers that are going to ruin the film for you. The film's about 11 years old or so, but I think that the topic and ideas are still really relevant today. So what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of information about the film, show you a preview of the film, and then I'll introduce our Q&A speaker today. So the film was released in 2012 by professional skateboarder Amelia Brodka, and she saw a lack of support within the skateboarding industry for women as she was inspired to make a change. She created this documentary, Underexposed, and it looks at issues related to skateboarding and women. She was really motivated by the X Games removing the women's vert competition. And she also started an organization called Exposure that connected women to professional skateboarding and skateboarding. Really similar to our speaker today, connecting women to skateboarding. So we're going to take a look at the preview and then I'll introduce Megs.
What is created out there of this thing, skateboard and bike, deservingly
female dominated. There's no question. They should be, in this activity. But because of the lack of backing behind it on the publicity side, it has hurt.
In 2002, my family and I went to the X Games in Philadelphia, and we were walking past the vert ramp when I noticed that there was a women's vert demo going on. And I'd never seen girls skateboarding before. And I was like, what? I want to do that. I want to skateboard. So then after that, I fell in love with skateboarding. I skated all the time. I got invited to be an alternate at the women's vert contest at the X Games. I was so close. I almost got to compete. It just motivated me to skate more and to work harder and to try to get in as a competitor for the following year. A few months before the X Games, the event coordinator came up to me and said, "You're on the invite list, but the women's event is canceled." So I wanted to find out what was going on with women's skateboarding and how it can be changed.
It's not all about the X Games. It's not that anyone wants to push girls out of this.
There's a lot more girls that skate now. They're all better than me.
Yeah, I think the missing link right now is visibility. I still think people don't know, that girls are in action sports and skate.
Whether it's in advertising, or it's in magazines, or it's on television, Like, women need to see other women skateboarding.
Do you feel like you can attain that seeing another girl do it?
Ideally, you're out getting coverage and you kind of like make yourself known.
But for right now, media's not paying attention to any of that, and they're not showing any of that.
If you looked at skateboard magazines, you probably still see very limited girl skateboarding in there.
If you want to make a life career out of it, you've got to go to contest rep.
They have struggled since, not having their own events. They have struggled. Who pays for these events and who structures them? It's all based on sponsorship.
We tried it. We tried our hardest to really make girls' products for girl skateboarders, and it didn't work.
Girls skateboarding and girls action sports in general is huge, and any company that can't see that is gonna get left behind.
It's boring with just a dudes club all the time.
There is no question everybody would be better off the more the females are involved. It's just a whole nother marketplace.
I think we're gonna have to go outside the industry, make something ourselves to show how much girls skating is growing, and then the industry will come to us.
So now I want to introduce our Q&A visitor today, Megs Gelfgot. She is the founder of Keep Her Wild, a skateboarding collective that empowers women of all ages through community and skateboarding. This community based in Cincinnati has grown to include women in 12 countries with retreats and workshops to get them living outside their comfort zones and chasing stoke in all areas of their lives. So thank you, Megs, for joining us today. I'm super excited to talk about the film with you. And I really enjoyed watching your TEDx video this morning too, and getting a little taste of you skateboarding. And in the video, you talked about your background related to skateboarding, how you got involved in skateboarding, how you got interested in it. Can you share with our viewers today?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, Allison, thank you so much for having me today. I'm so excited. I had never seen this film before. And so we kind of talked a little bit offline beforehand, but I'm just really excited to be able to not only watch the film, but kind of share thoughts with you guys today. And I hope that it's not only impactful, but that we can have an engaging discussion about it, because there's so many topics that stem past a board with four wheels. So yes, I'm just so excited to be here today with you. So a little bit about my story with skateboarding. I did not grow up skating. I'm from Arizona. There wasn't a huge skate culture there. And I really equated it with like high school dropouts, maybe some drug usage, like nothing about it at the time really appealed to me. And I certainly didn't know any women who skateboarded. And so it wasn't until many years later, I was 29, I was a wife, new mom, and I kind of looked at the landscape of my life. Work was going well, family was going well, but I found myself lost in this new mother mentality. Hopefully we have some moms on the line today. And there was just this monotony and this routine where, while I loved my role as a mom, that became my identity. You're so-and-so's wife, you're so-and-so's mother. And I really needed to find some of that fierceness that I lost along the way. I mean, I use this expression of feeling tamed in suburbia. And so I had this kind of longing for, I'm meant for more. And at the time, that looked like reaching for regret. And my regret came in the form of a skateboard. And, for me, it was less about the skateboard and more about having an activity that really pushed me outside of my comfort zone and helped remind me that I can do difficult things. And so my skating experience was, again, at 29, and it was learning in an empty parking lot how to skate. And as most of you can imagine, in suburbia culture, a mom skateboarding is not super popular, right? Like, what are you doing? This is a phase, like you're gonna hurt yourself. And it really unleashed something within me that not only helped remind me who I was and just this confidence to do difficult things, and that translated off of the board, but slowly it helped build community as well.
One of the things that you share in your talk is a photograph of you after you had some failure at a skate park, covered in blood, and you talk about the experience and the dynamic of like being embarrassed around teenage boys, which I thought was so funny, like being in your 20s or 30s, like as a mom and a parent, like going through this experience that maybe would have been the reason that I wouldn't want to skateboard as a teenager. Like, oh man, there are going to be boys there. They're going to make fun of me.
Yeah.
Like, can you talk about that experience and what it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I talk about that, I never grew up skating. There were plenty of hobbies that I was interested in that I never even dabbled in because there was this fear of rejection, of looking silly, of being embarrassed. And so many of those even translated to an adult. For all intents and purposes, I was a successful, functioning adult, right? Like I can handle myself. And yet there was this looming barrier around a skate park. For me, up until this point, I had only been skating in empty parking lots. I'm not doing that in front of an audience. I can just fall on my own. No one has to see about it. And as I progressed, I wanted those challenges. And when I tell you I went to these skate parks, I must have gone at least 8 times where I drove all the way out there and then it would be packed with usually like teenage boys. And I'm like, I'm not doing it. I'm not getting physically, out of the car. And so the Skatepark incident is, I started getting a little bit more confidence, trying new things there. And I wiped out so hard. And the picture she's referring to, I happened to be in a shirt that said pray, which is a little ironic at the time as I'm like bleeding from the face. And for me in that moment, it would have been just so easy to be like, okay, this is it. We gave this little phase like a try, like let's go home and try something a little safer. But it was a pivotal moment for me of, you think you're resilient. You think that you're the hero of your own story. Here's an opportunity. It's a small opportunity, but let's see what you're made of. And so for me, resilience looked like trying again, right then, complete with that audience of heckling teenage boys. Even as an adult, that was like so difficult for me, and finding success that day. And it was just so much more than landing that trick, and more like, okay, I faced this. This was difficult. It was embarrassing. It was humbling. And I made it to the other side. And I think especially as women and as adults, there's this curiosity that gets muted within us because of this fear of rejection or embarrassment or, whatever. And so for me, it was this like, well, if I can survive, these heckling teenage boys, what else can I do? How am I limiting myself in business, relationally, just from a growth mentality? And that was a shift for me, is this, how do you lean into a growth mindset?
I love that idea of taking something like skateboarding and using it as a way to like build resilience and power in yourself that translates into other places that you may feel uncomfortable in asserting yourself, like a boardroom or at work. So that's so cool, because when I first was reading about Keep Her Wild, I thought that it was a way to like get kids involved and engaged. But I love this idea that it goes beyond that, that it's about women and getting them to connect with skateboarding. And I've seen so many like mom clubs related to not skateboarding, but roller skating recently. So I think that women are connecting to sports in that way, and like finding it as an outlet, not just for exercise, but for like building resiliency in their lives. Can you talk about how you took those little experiences of teaching yourself resiliency through skateboarding to build Keep Her Wild? Can you talk more about Keep Her Wild and what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I talked about kind of this evolution started from a place of feeling a little lost in my identity, specifically in motherhood. I mentioned I live in Cincinnati, but I'm from Arizona, and I just did not have good community. It was my husband and his bachelor business partners, and that was about it. And so, I had tried moms groups, and they felt really forced, and it didn't feel like my people, right? Like it just, you're looking for your people. And so it brought to mind this question of, if you're not from an area, how do you make friends as an adult? And it's such a simple question, but I believe that we are built for community. And so that when we get into these hard places, which we're all going to experience at some point, these difficult chapters, without community, we can really become even further isolated in this kind of tunnel vision of like life will always be like this, as opposed to this is a challenging period and this is not going to go on forever. So for me, as I was building more momentum around the skating world, and that was impacting other areas of my life, it really helped me weather some difficult chapters. I lost one of my sisters to a car accident, and I was also diagnosed with a heart condition. And those were both in a very short period of time. And so I can remember after my first heart surgery, where at this time it's this like fragility of life that you're faced with. And I felt like I was again taking stock of my life and where am I being timid? And is that how I want to live? And so what I had seen from skateboarding in terms of how it really ignited different areas of my life and my confidence, I wanted to share that with people. And so I had made the decision that we would bring this to Cincinnati. And I really thought it would just be a handful of people that showed up. I think we used the Meetup app at the time, and 50 women showed up to this first event. And so many of them, it was like, that looks awesome. I want to try that, and they had so many similar stories to my own that one, it was about trying something completely out of their norm that was kind of seen a little bit as like taboo, right? Like sometimes as moms, and I think even professional women, we're seen as just one thing, as opposed to, you are a little wild, right? We are a little fierce. I always reference things like a female lion, right? Like they're out there hunting and like taking care of business. Like certainly we have that capacity as well. And so how do you nurture both the fierce and feminine within yourselves? And so that's kind of where the community piece came, is that this is just more of a sisterhood of encouraging, empowering one another.
And what sorts of events have you done with Keep Her Wild? It looks like there are meetups all over the world.
Yeah, yep. So we have chapters in 12 countries, and we have a combination of events. So we have some that are skating 101. We do a lot of longboarding as well, and we just kind of give people an intro to skating. We run these for children as well. But in addition to that, we offer workshops around confidence and goal setting. And then at the root of all of our events, again, it's fostering community. So if you're not by a Keep Her Wild chapter, we offer online events to just help you engage and hopefully uncover more things about yourself.
So I want to dig into the film a little bit. It's called Underexposed, and I think that it's really, we were talking about how it was made about 11, 12 years ago, but it doesn't seem dated at all. The issues that Amelia Brodka was exploring in the film are still really relevant today. So women are underexposed in skateboarding, whether it's like going to a park, having fun, longboarding, or like professional skateboarding. There's not that kind of presence of women. What do you think that we can do to bring more exposure to women in skateboarding?
Yeah, there's so much that, as you said, is just relevant today. As far as what we can do, I think that a lot of the trailblazing has happened, over the last 20 years, where these women have just persevered. For those of you who've seen the film, and so many of the pros don't get paid, like they get free product, but they're just grateful to have events. Whereas you have the men's that are getting paid and flown places and free product. And so, I think that while the shift takes time, that it's just more conversations about this. And even things like skate groups, like has just been an explosion in the last 2-3 years of female skate groups. And in a lot of ways, skateboarding is very much a minority fringe activity. For so long, it was these kind of like rebel teenage kids. But what's been difficult about that is you have women who are even more fringe within a small community. And then within that, there's more segments, right? If you are a feminine woman, you are even more excluded, right? Like you got to be a boy's girl to really get in and mix well. And luckily those narratives are shifting, but I just think that it's having transparency and conversations. And then again, seeing more just content. I think social media has really helped move the needle on progression.
Mm-hmm. So the film talks a little bit about sponsorship and contests as major avenues for success in skateboarding. And there was this comparison of like the women really needed the contest for exposure, but the men could get like they could make a video on their phone and a company would see it and want to like give them money or give them merch, give them sponsorship, and this idea of like sponsorship and what it meant. What do you think is the most important avenue for women to have success in skateboarding if they want to be pros? Do you think that sponsorship is important? Do you think competition is important?
Yeah, so luckily, social media has helped change that significantly. As they talked about in the movie, that the reason that these contests are to an extent controversial is, as Allison mentioned, that these guys, they could just take pictures and get paid for them, whereas women had to prove themselves in a different way by competing in these contests. And some of them were called vert or vertical, so those are like really high ramps. And there's just a much higher barrier to not only entry, right? Your skill set has to be more developed, but there's a huge risk of injury. If you take a bad fall, you're out for 6-7 months. And so the men just didn't have that in order to be successful. And so, today, it's less about, while competitions still remain, I would say, the fastest avenue for exposure and sponsorships, social media and having a following were just not an option previously, whereas now you will get paid on that. You will get paid on pictures if you're not going the contest route. So thankfully that has shifted somewhat.
So the other thing I wanted to talk about was the marketing related to skateboarding. There's a great part of the film where they talk about like marketing of products, whether it's like wheels or skateboards or clothing. And like when marketing was for men, all of the men were in action and they're moving around, they're skateboarding. And if it's about women, it's like a lifestyle thing. So the women are skateboarding. Sometimes it's not even professional skateboarders, it's models posing in the clothes, or like a model holding a skateboard, like they've never seen a skateboard before. Can you talk a little bit about that marketing? And do you feel like that has changed in the past few years at all, or is it pretty similar? I know that like a lot of those brands that are lifestyle brands that are skateboarding related, like Vans, so much of their money comes from people who don't skateboard to begin with. Yeah. I'm wondering if you're seeing more women who are skateboarding in the marketing for those materials, or is it still like women that are active and men who are active in the photos?
Yeah, so that was a really interesting topic because I think marketing in general has this this pervasive thought around women's marketing, right? Shrink it and pink it is very much a phrase that gets thrown around in the design world. Like that's what women want, just, change the original design a little bit, let's slap some pink on it, out the door. And so within the skating world and really any action sport, you had a lot of these companies, it's like 10 to 15 guys who were skaters. That's their background. And so then they kind of built these companies. And so one, they didn't think that there was an audience for it, which, it's like half the population is women. So certainly there is. But then they were approaching it from this lens of like sex sells, or, women want to look like someone beautiful, which habitually has been true on so much marketing. So it's not that they were so far off the mark, but as the sport grew specifically for women, as Allison mentioned, they had this, the filmmaker did a survey on the street of the action versus standing there holding it and holding the board wrong as well, and skating is unique and it's similar to surf in that it is a culture. So even here in the Midwest, people who don't surf, for example, they want to be part of that culture. They can kind of understand the vibe, the mentality, and they want to be part of that. And skate is very similar to that. And so that's why you see so many brands selling their stuff at a TJ Maxx or, a third party, because people just want a little piece of being at that cool table, right? They're cool by association, by wearing the gear. And so I've seen that be very true for women as well, right? They're wearing the Vans shoes. They've never been to a skate park. They've never stepped on a board, but they're trying to have some of that association, which I get. And I think that lifestyle piece, as you said, is a huge part of their brand, of people just trying to, this kind of tribal, I'm part of this. I want to be part of that group. But as the sport has grown for a lot of women who do skate, it's kind of offensive, right? Because you do have so many women who are attractive, let's say, like they fit the model bill, they can do it and do it in an action shot. And so it's been this really challenging thing where you don't see posters, let's say, of women from skateboarding magazines up because they're usually like half clothed, and you're like, she can do that with a shirt on. I promise. I promise that she can skate that really well with a shirt on. So there isn't as strong as a disconnect as there was previously, I'd say in the 90s and the 2000s. But that marketing gap, it's still there to an extent.
And part of that is probably because there aren't enough women working at these companies. So again, like it's filtered through men and what they either expect women to want, or they're selling like women's bodies instead of the product. So the thing that I wanted to ask you about was visibility of women in skateboarding. I remember getting interested and curious about skateboarding as a teenager through the music I was listening to and the connection to that, and like going into a bookstore and picking up a Thrasher magazine, which they show in the film. And most of the ads that have women in those are naked women. So how important is exposure? Because when I saw that, I thought like, okay, this isn't for me. I'm going to put this down and move on. And that was my experience with skateboarding. So how important is exposure, and how important is exposure not only related to being a woman, but visibility related to race as well, which is discussed in the film?
Yeah, like some other minority sports where you just don't see a lot of women, typically action sports kind of fits the bill for that. I talked a little bit about needing to be a tomboy or a boy's girl to be accepted, and to an extent that is very much still the case when it comes to magazines. It's only recently with the Olympics, Letitia, who's one of the stars on that team, she's Brazilian and just classically beautiful. However, you've had previously some of the top skaters were more butch, were more like tomboy in terms of their fashion. And now you're seeing this kind of divergence of the femme skater versus the tomboy skater. And it's really hard that those two narratives have to compete with one another, as opposed to both can be celebrated and both can bring so much to the table in the audience that they're reaching, not one or the other. And so where marketing is concerned today, especially in those magazines, it's still very much like just randomly half naked girls because it's a board full of guys who are putting these together. And it's unfortunate, but I also think that the way around it is for all the downfall that social media brings, it is also this direct conduit to a new audience where you're reaching them on your terms. And that's what we've seen with the rise of skate groups that are all female. There's a really great one, Black Girl Skater, which is now a national, or I'm sorry, a global campaign that's connecting these women who are Black within skating, because it's an even smaller group. And so, as you said, I think just visually seeing these people, and more so their stories, in the marketing side on the film, they talked about the comparison between both men and women when it comes to marketing, that when you have a pro male skater, they want to see their tricks. What can they land? How good are they? We don't need to hear them talk. Whereas with a female, you need to actually get to know them to be invested in them. And I think that that's still true, but also because females as a demographic that's maybe going to purchase their boards or their clothes, like, I want to feel like I know you. I want to know the struggle you've had and that it wasn't easy for you to get here. They want to know some of those things so they can be just more of a fan and understand their story.
You brought up gender identity related to like being butch or femme in skateboarding. And one of the most interesting things in the film, and I don't remember the skater's name, but they talked to a skater who was trans and someone who had competitively skated as a woman and then was skating as a man, and talked about the way that they were perceived. And it was really interesting because they were perceived in a totally different way when they were competing as a woman versus male. Can you talk more about like the gender roles in skateboarding, especially like whether it's professional or hobby related? Because I think that is playing out in an interesting way today.
Yeah, you know, in that particular trans case, what they were talking about was some of the biological differences, but also the mentality. You know, for women, when we're learning a new skill, we're much more analytical about it. How do I go about this and not get hurt, right? And so we tend to be a little more timid, which I think is great. You know, we're wearing pads. We're a lot more methodical about the steps to achieve something. Whereas men, they're just going to go for it. They're just going to go full send, and they might get hurt along the way. They get up, they try it again. And so those two mentalities from the start put them on different platforms of what they can achieve in terms of how they're approaching the trick. And then also you just have athletic differences. And that is, I mean, and that's just more from a biological standpoint. And that particular trans athlete was just talking about the differences they saw in their own performance when they started taking testosterone along with some other things. And just the complete difference in their athletic performance and with the mentality shift.
The other thing that I guess the thing that surprised me or made the experience of gender and skateboarding seem really dated, although it wasn't so long ago. They profile Alyssa Steamer, who went pro in 1998. And the person from, I think the Toy Machine, was talking about the reception that they got at their company by sponsoring a pro player. People felt that women devalued that brand. They assumed that she wasn't good enough. They thought that that they must be romantically involved with this woman to be willing to sponsor her. That the idea that people in 1998 wouldn't be like super excited and think like, hey, girl power, like a woman who's a pro skateboarder who has sponsorship. Do you think that reactions have changed since 1998 to women in skateboarding? Or do you think that there are still people out there who perceive it that way?
Yeah, you know, so while I was familiar with the skater, I was not familiar with the blowback that they experienced from that. And at the time, they were a top skate brand. And, you know, I really liked how they articulated it, where at the time and a little bit today, that skating is very much like a high school setting or like a little gang. You can't have a girl in the gang. And so you had this top brand that was suddenly devalued because they brought a woman onto the team, even though, you know, they even described her skate style as being extremely masculine in how she was skating, how she dressed, just trying to fit in, but also she was an exceptional skater. And when they talked about the amount of blowback and the letters that they got from kids that were just like, there's no way that she skates good enough. Like they completely trashed the brand. They took a huge hit monetarily on their sales because of it. I mean, it was a huge deal. But again, 1998 is not that long ago. As far as today, while you do see more big brands bringing on a female skater, maybe even two, they talked about it a little bit towards the end of the movie, that then they feel like they've hit the quota, right? We got like 20 male riders. We got a girl. We got it. Let's move on, right? Like, isn't this enough for you? You have the one or the two. And so I still think that there are some of those attitudes where it's like you're checking the box and like, all right, the ladies got something, like we're acknowledging it. You know, I even see this on a small scale here locally. The first few times that I went to skate shops, where you would think that a woman in her 30s would have more disposable income than a 17-year-old boy, right? Who typically would go in for like one thing, as opposed to someone who is brand new to skating and like, tell me what I need to get. Like, I need to get all the things. And there's this resistance of your poisoning like the purity of skating. And it's surprising that even, you know, today in 2021, that's a thing. That's very much still a prevalent attitude on the local level.
So for those of us who have seen the film and we feel inspired, we want to go out and try skateboarding, or we want to introduce our daughters or granddaughters to skateboarding, what do you recommend? Or if we just want to consume more skateboarding culture, whether it's like watching the Olympics or watching professional women in skateboarding, what should we be looking for?
Yeah, so it's a little different now in terms of, like, let's say with young girls getting into it, because there are so many great stories to follow. And again, social media is kind of the best place to start for that. And you see 3 and 4-year-old girls who are just tearing it up, which is just amazing. I have a 7-year-old daughter, and she's getting the basics, and I see what some of these 3 and 4-year-old girls can do. I'm like, this is amazing. Like, they are just spectacular. So as far as kind of the building blocks, always going with pads, always going with a decent board. Skating can be a little expensive to get into if you're getting a full setup. Even starting at someplace like Play It Again Sports and getting a used longboard or something like that, just to get the basics of, let me stand on a board, put it on a carpet so that it doesn't roll around. As far as looking for additional resources, Keeper Wild does a ton virtually as well to support, but I would even just look to see if there's any other skate groups in your area, because it's a lot more fun learning with a group in person, and the learning curve tends to be a lot shorter.
What other media should we be consuming? I know the Olympics are coming up. I'm a big fan of the show. I know I mentioned it to you before on HBO called Betty, which is a fictional show about women in skateboarding. And it totally resonates with this film for me because they're women who are really talented skateboarders. One of them makes like a film on her video. She gets some sponsored gear from a company, and instead of like a sweatshirt or a hat, they give her like really tight clothing, and they try to have her make a video. Is there any other like skateboarding cultural stuff that would be really cool to look at that features women?
Yeah, so that HBO is probably the, I would say, like the top of what's out there TV or like streaming wise. There's a group called, I want to say it's called Skate is Tan, but it's all one word. And they are, I want to say, over in Africa, and it's on Netflix. It's a really interesting documentary. I think it won a bunch of awards, that takes a look at how they're bringing skating into third world countries, and how, again, from the confidence standpoint, that is really making a huge difference in communities. What we really try to focus on with the women that we interact with, and even the young girls, is that this is just one piece. We've really expanded into surfing and wakeboarding and all of these other action sports, less about the sport itself and more about this evolving adventure mentality. So much of us, our day is packed, right? Whether it's with work or with, especially, kind of coming out of the pandemic and trying to find our new norm, we can get lost in the shuffle. And so our hope is that you're living a more intentional life. And that comes from growing, right? Like, when was the last time you picked up a book? Or when was the last time, that you tried a new hobby that was way outside of your comfort zone? Because for so many people, after they're done with college or high school, that's it. And then they kind of settle into daily life. And so the bigger picture, kind of with all of these films and whatnot, is just helping remind women that you can do difficult things. And sometimes the messaging and the marketing doesn't always suggest that, but it's nice to be in a community of people who will remind you of that, encourage you in that.
Well, Megs Gelfgot, thank you so much for joining us for a discussion of Underexposed, the documentary today. If you haven't viewed the documentary yet, it is still available through whatever streaming service you like to use, but more specifically, Hoopla, the Stark Library streaming system. Megs, if we want to connect with you or keep it wild, where can we find you?
Yeah, so the best platform to find us, you can find me on Instagram. It's rad.megs with an S, M-E-G-S, or Keeper Wild HQ. Our website is the same, keeperwildhq.com. And I know that we kind of touched on a lot of different points today, but we'd love to hear from you, whether it's an email or a DM, what you thought about the film. And yeah, we're just always looking to connect with more people. So yeah.
Well, thank you, Megs. Thanks everyone for talking to us today. Someone is saying the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative and Asian Pacific American Center recently hosted a Wikipedia edit-a-thon to create Wikipedia articles about Judy Oyama. So there's a movement to document the history of women in this field too. So thank you so much for sharing that. And if you want to keep sharing with us about your experiences, you can head to the Keep It Wild social media pages or the National First Ladies Library on Facebook. And our discussion will be posted to YouTube soon. So if you want to share this with someone else, please do. So thank you, Megs, for joining us today, and we will see you all next time.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Ashlyn. Appreciate it.
Bye. Have a great day.